right, and now we're joined by two guests. Let me introduce Robert Pszczel, former NATO official, and Jeff Hawn, military analyst, London School of Economics. Thanks for joining us here on the program. Good to have you both.
Thank you.
Now, I want to jump right into what we just heard from our analyst here, looking at the changes to this whole conscription in Ukraine, the impact on Poland. I want to start with you, Robert, because, I mean, just the statement from the defense minister, how he said that he's hinting at potential assistance of Poland in this matter. I mean, how does that work realistically and legally? Do you think this is going to look like people being summoned by police or authorities? Give us your take on that, Robert.
Well, I think, one has to be kind of realistic. I mean, this issues, of course, because we're talking about, after all, citizens of another country. This should be a matter, and of course, I'm sure it is. It will be of cooperation between the two governments. But in terms of due to the fact that the numbers that you mentioned earlier in the program are very, very substantial. I mean, at the end of the day, Polish, who would it be? Prosecutors, police, would actually have their hands really full if they started, quote unquote, chasing the Ukrainians of eligible age. So there has to be an element of sort of cooperation. But yes, it really very much depends what our friends from Kiev would expect, and then of course realistically what the Polish authorities could help with. But the issue is important because this is a war of attrition. So the truth is that I think probably Kiev, waited a little bit too long for the load that again you describe, because the Russians, although they're not in the full mobilization mode, but they are trying various tricks to, of course, increase their capacity to supply, some people call it cannon fodder, to the front lines. So Ukraine, of course, is demographically weaker, but nevertheless can make up some of that difference with people who are of fighting age. And then the fighting age itself matters because there's a lot of people over the age of 40 who are on the battle lines, and that's another issue. That new law, it's kind of a little bit falls short of regulating this. So there are various things which are a challenge for Ukrainian authorities, but the issue is of great importance, and I'm sure the Polish authorities will try to help because that's the way friends operate. But nevertheless, it's not as simple as it sounds.
And now, Jeff, I wanted to ask you because just also like Robert said, we have this war of attrition, also a shortage of manpower, like we heard in our report by our colleague. And now we also find out that convicts will also be able to serve in the army. What do you make of that?
It's not surprising because, as my colleague noted, Kiev's first step will be to try to incentivize people in order to increase levels of mobilization to sustain the current amount of soldiers they have under arms. I don't think they're looking for a significant increase, but they have to have replacements come up to the front, especially because the attritional tactics the Russians have embraced have resulted in high casualties. In terms of convicts, that is a potentially large, so far untapped source of manpower, especially because in other situations, convicts have been able to earn expungement to their sentences through military service, essentially regaining rights lost due to past criminal actions. So it's a enormous effort.
All right, we're just hearing there from Jeff, there, a military analyst, and I think we're having some problem with the sound there. But let's wait on that for a moment. Let's go back to you, Robert, for a moment, because we also have now this major package, of course, coming from the United States, over $60 billion. A lot of that now paves the way coming forward in terms of actual aid being purchased or shipped, munitions shipped that are vitally needed on the front line. We're hearing reports of also these missiles that apparently have already now being used. This is sort of under the radar secret package, apparently. Longer range ATACMS, longer than they've had before. Can we expect more of this, Robert, in the coming days, perhaps, turning the tide, maybe?
Well, let's hope so. ATACMS, short for this, essentially missiles which indeed are longer range. That has been an outstanding issue. In fact, illustrating a certain, regardless of this terrible delay, almost half a year. But thank God that's been resolved. But the U.S. administration, extremely helpful as it has been, it has. In different periods of this war, kind of, introduce certain sort of red lines in terms of the type of supplies. And ATACMS, one of the last, if you like, of those that has, a lot of people called for, not just Ukrainians, but military experts and others, that would be immensely helpful to Ukrainians because it works like this. First of all, they allow to essentially hit the targets, such as logistics centers and other key military installations, which prevent Russians from conducting various offensive operations. And because not only they're long range, but they're also very much, they're very precise, they're very modern, and the Russians have difficulties coping with them. They also help Ukraine to stem the attacks on their own, for example, energy centers, etc. So it's immensely, and it saves lives, to put it bluntly. So yes, there's been a lot of talk of it, and as we understand now from various people in administration, this was a personal decision of the president, and it's a good decision. So one hopes that there will be more of those, and the way that it was done, I think this is the right way. Not everything has to be telegraphed, because in the end it's the war. We should not help the other side, but that's only part of this very big package, which is absolutely crucial. And the speed with which different other elements, ammunition, and of course, hopefully also, more sophisticated defense systems are supplied is substantial. It's without this, Ukraine would not be able to hold the lines. As simple as that.
And Jeff, I wanted to ask you now, as we were also covering today the speech which was made by Poland's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Radosław Sikorski, and he today, in that speech, he expressed the need for the gradual integration of Ukraine into broader Euro-Atlantic structures. So why is it paramount that that happen as soon as possible, and how do you see it play out on a timeline?
I think that it's important that it happens as soon as possible because it illustrates Western political resolve to continue to support Ukraine. The Kremlin strategy essentially is to keep up the conflict long enough that the West will lose interest and cease its financial support. The time frame is going to be very difficult, but we know that Kiev has already been moving in that direction and is going to do its best efforts to sustain that. The long-term goal of these aid packages is not a continuous stream of money, but it's a sustained investment to help Ukraine pay for its own defense, redevelop its industry to provide for its own military forces, and to keep its government functioning strong enough and long enough, essentially to force the Russians to realize that they can't just simply outlast Ukraine and wear it down via attrition.
Yeah, I also want to quote here this speech really quickly of from Mr. Sikorski. He said, very much, Putin's only hope is our lack of determination. Now, you mentioned armaments. I mean, we saw very much to the relief, I think, not just of Ukraine, but of Europe, how important those arms are already flowing slowly to, or rather, hopefully quickly to Ukraine. But I think therein also lies the challenge, because also we had Macron's speech today emphasizing very much building faster, building a defense industry, European defense. We have new purchases now by the Polish government, the 14th, I think, biggest military spender in the world. Just a recent supplies of, I think, South Korean howitzers. So this is the question here. I'll give it to both of you. I'll start with you, Robert, briefly. Where is the fine line here? Can we build it all in Europe? Because, I mean, there's that political desire to have this industry flourish in Europe, but can we really afford to build it up now, and with Poles buying from abroad? Where's the balance here? Can Europe stand on its own? Can we build fast and European, or is that maybe a pipe dream?
No, I mean, it's not a pipe dream, but it's also, I would not use the word balance because, very often balance is used to actually describe some, some of the red lines and other forms of whatever. We start talking about this escalation, etc. The issue is that, on paper, in terms of capabilities, the abilities, the technical, the industrial might of the Western countries, both in NATO and EU and other partners. I mean, it's the preponderance of Russia is incredible, even with the assistance of China, as long as China does not get involved in the direct supply of military supplies. So on paper, it should not be that difficult. But Russia it's not yet a war economy sense, but it has ramped up. It's a quasi-war economy. And that's like the difference in Europe and actually in US as well. I mean, that has simply not happened. So, that requires a resolve. That requires concrete outlays, big long-term contracts. The industry will produce, but it has to know that this is more for long-term. And also, there are other issues that need to be tackled, such as the supply of key components. Yes, China is supplying some components to Russia, but also some components, for example, needed to produce as basic stuff as powder, gunpowder, actually come from China. So there's an issue of dependency. So all those issues need to be tackled in a variety of ways. And if there is money allocated, if there is resolve, and it starts with political will, right, then we will have results because there is absolutely no rational reason why combined forces, as I said, of Europe, US, and Canada, and other countries of the democratic community would be in a weaker position than Russia. That should simply not be the case. But
right.
We need
okay.
to
Just
act now.
Okay. Acting now important. I'm quick closing comment, Jeff. Before I'm crunched at the time. What's your say on this before we end?
I think Robert's correct. There's no reason why the West can't meet to the demands of its defense, of Ukraine's defense and its own domestic defense, but it does take long-term investment, long-term contracts, and there has to be a certain level of predictability because there is a lot of these are very capital-intensive industries. But we are witnessing the world go through a unfortunate transition of a next generation of warfighting capabilities and evolution. And part of that is a revival of domestic defense industries in countries that previously had largely dismantled those. So over the next several years, we're likely to see defense industry capabilities increase across the board. The question is, does Ukraine have enough time and how long this war will last? So clearly, Ukraine needs as much support now as it can possibly muster.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you very much to you both for shedding light on this issue. Robert Pszczel, former NATO official, and Jeff Hawn, military analyst from the London School of Economics. Thank you very much to you both.